Good morning, Derryfield. What a lovely Monday morning it is to see you all. I'd like to start with just a noisy minute, if you will. Today we're talking about a little bit about global education and about the importance of human-centered connections. If you could take a moment and share with the person next to you for just about a minute or so, what is a global ed experience? And that doesn't always mean traveling. It can mean a conversation that you have with someone in which you learn something about a different culture. It can be about a different life experience you learn about outside of this daily context of life that we experience within our own social and cultural dynamics. But in short, what's a global education experience you've had that helped you learn about another person? Just take about 30 to 45 seconds and maybe share with someone next to you. Okay, friends, thank you. Thank you, although I would like that to go on for at least 5 more minutes. I wonder if we could keep that level of enthusiastic conversation going. My next question, the first one wasn't a question, but here is a question. Where was this photo taken at the Derryfield school? Where was this photo taken at Derryfield? Was this photo taken, now the question's changing. Was this photo taken at the Derryfield school? No. Where was this photo taken? Can anybody guess? It's a country in the world. Can somebody yell it out, please? Nepal, no. I heard Ireland, no. No. Whoa, I believe Mr. Chappell is completely correct. This photo was taken in Korea. Give a round of applause, Mr. Chappell, everybody. Dr. Myers, you should be clapping harder. Clap harder, sir. We should all clap harder. Thank you. Say that again, please. Maroon, no, that is Team Maroon. Okay, that's a problem. All right, that's a problem. Oh, hold on. Oh, whoa. Serious points. This photo was taken in Pyongyang, in a library in North Korea. And I start by showing you this photo because when we think about global education, we have to begin from a place of thinking about a world beyond ourselves, about cultures different than those that might define our daily lives. And we want to learn about things that are different. But as we do, the common denominator that we have to return to is our shared humanity. We might think about a country like North Korea, which has a reprehensible government. But when we think about a country like that, we should think about the shared humanity of millions of young people in North Korea, like these young people in a library studying. And we should care about their human dignity. And we should also take a moment to think that right now in North Korea, there are classrooms with kids thinking about you. And there is something that helps us transcend what divides us politically and ideologically. And that is what we all fundamentally have in common as human beings. Why global education? As a brief introduction from here on out, the theme for the next 25 minutes or so is about what happens when we get beyond these safe moments of where we feel really comfortable within our own culture and we reach out in search of that shared humanity. Empathy and respect for the shared humanity of all. Next up to speak will be Ashley and Taylor Hardner, and then they will be followed by Mr. Kevin Porter from Where There Be Dragons. And we're going to hear a little bit more about this emphasis on human-centered connections as we go abroad. And then I will end by talking about some global education opportunities right here at home as well as abroad. Please, Taylor and Ashley Hardner next.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
I'm Taylor.
We're both seniors, and over the summer we had the opportunity to continue our study of the Arabic language overseas in Tunisia, which should be a picture, is located in North Africa and is actually home to the northernmost point of Africa. So while Arabic was our inspiration for this trip, we had a lot of experiences that left us with a deep appreciation for the culture and the people of Tunisia.
So every day we had an Arabic class with our teacher, Muhammad. And aside from just Arabic, Muhammad also taught us a lot about Islam, which he practices, which was something we did not know a lot about because we personally do not identify with it. He was super enthusiastic and just really loved talking about this and sharing it with people who didn't identify with it. And we were able to learn how modern standard Arabic really intertwined with Islam. So by the end of these conversations, which we had every single day with him, we had so much respect for this culture and just learning a lot about American perspectives of this religion and the culture, and really being able to step outside of that, understanding it in like a one-on-one perspective. So we really encourage other people to explore topics like that you may not know a lot about, because you'll likely end up having a lot of respect for this topic.
So on the final night that we were in Tunisia, Mohammed invited our family out to dinner with his family, you can see here. And we got to meet his two sons, one who was named Wethek, and he was actually our age. And so we got to compare our lives in growing up. And while there was a lot of differences between us, we realized that we all had very similar intentions. We were both working towards getting into college, which the process looked very different for both of us, but we still had similar intentions in the future. And we were the first Americans that Wethek was able to actually sit down with and talk to and get to know. So while we were there to learn about their culture, we also were there to represent Americans and the first impression that other people would get of Americans.
So something else that was really unique about Tunisia is they have so many Roman and Carthaginian ruins along with artifacts from the Punic era. So while we were there, we were able to travel to Duga and Carthage and visit these ruins. And since Tunisia is not a super tourist hotspot, we were able to go to these places and almost nobody was there. So we were able to really explore them without a lot of people there in a place similar to Rome, perhaps. So while we were there, this picture, there were some people restoring a 4,000-year-old mosaic, and they were super excited that we were there visiting, and that person right there is actually me. They let me place stones into this old mosaic, which was really cool, because they were just really excited to share their culture. So that's kind of something, my family doesn't usually travel to common tourist destinations, and the best travel experiences that we've shared have been in places outside of common areas. So meeting people and learning about their culture, really embracing the lifestyle is what makes for the best trips, and people love when you just are interested in their lifestyle, their language, their culture, and learning about them. So we really encourage people to take the opportunity, if it ever arises, to maybe go on a trip that's out of your comfort zone, that's not a tourist hotspot, and make these really meaningful connections with people around the world, because you'll learn that we're all really the same people, and you'll just have really meaningful connections and learn a ton about things you had no idea about before.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Kevin Porter.
All right, good morning, Derryfield. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kevin Porter, and at lunch today, I'll be here on behalf of an organization called Where There Be Dragons, which runs travel programs for students. But this morning, I'm really here more on a personal note. I was invited by Dr. G to come and share some of my personal stories that connect to the theme of what you're talking about this morning. So I grew up in Westford, Massachusetts, about half an hour from here, and I was always kind of a curious kid, read a lot, was like interested in adventure and travel, dreamt of faraway places, but I never really had the opportunity to get out and travel when I was in high school. But it was actually interesting in thinking about coming here today. I was thinking back on someone who came to my high school who was a Peace Corps volunteer, and they had just come back from travel overseas, and they shared these amazing stories, and it was this insight like, wow, okay, that's maybe how I can access this really interesting world that's out there. So after high school, went on to Harvard University, and when I was there, I started studying international relations, comparative politics, social anthropology. I was in these classes with these great professors, and I became really interested in refugee rights and refugee issues. I started thinking that I knew something about what was going on in the world. I was paying attention, like these big picture sort of topics and themes and geopolitics and all this. And I had an opportunity to go to South Korea and work for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. I was studying best practices in the reception of asylum seekers. These are people who have had to leave their home country due to concerns for their own safety, uproot their family, everything that they know, everything that they have, sometimes just packing a single suitcase and fleeing to another country. And what some host countries like the United States or other countries in Europe, were doing to receive these people, what sorts of resources they could provide them. So I was studying this stuff, and again, I'm like, oh, I kind of, I'm studying this, I'm researching, I'm working with these great, different organizations. I kind of think I know what I'm talking about. And it wasn't until a few weeks into this experience that I actually had the chance to meet refugees. And I realized that I had no idea what I was talking about because I had never made this human connection to this topic that I was reading about and just, researching and looking at the numbers. And until you meet the real humans and hear their stories, and in Korea specifically, I was meeting people who had made this arduous journey from North Korea, defecting out of the country at great personal peril, and getting to South Korea to try to declare for asylum. So again, I'm in that space, think I kind of know what I'm talking about, hear these great stories. Fast forward a few years, I've graduated, I'm living in East Africa, doing consulting work, eventually get into international experiential education. And it was then that I found myself in Thailand with an opportunity to spend a few days living inside of a refugee camp for people from Myanmar who had fled the country. And a little bit of a backstory on the conflict there is in the late 80s and 90s, the military took over the government. All these democratic freedoms were really repressed violently, and there's certain different ethnic groups within the country who were all fighting for their democratic ideals were being violently repressed. So all these people, hundreds of thousands of refugees, were trying to pour across the border into Thailand. And this area along the border is a heavily jungled area, very dense mountains, and many of these kind of informal refugee camps had popped up along the border. And again, hundreds of thousands of people in those conditions, often traveling with nothing more than a small bag. So I'm on this experience. I've got a couple of people that I'm going with, and we had a 4-hour journey in off-road vehicles, riding in the back of these pickup trucks, crossing streams, through jungles, remote areas, out to this refugee camp. We were passing military checkpoints along the way, which was intimidating, and we weren't really sure what this experience was going to be like. We had to have permits from the government to visit this place, and we come out, and eventually we come down into the camp, and there's about 9,000 people living in the camp that I spent a few days in. And as you come in, there's multiple rivers. Everything that you see here had been built by the refugees themselves, coming in, gathering supplies, building an entire community out of bamboo and thatch. We stayed a few days, and we were staying with a family, and we began hearing people's stories and traveling around and just learning about the Karen, which was mostly the ethnic group in this area, learning about their stories, learning about the hardships they had faced, but also just learning about the way that they were living. And they were still celebrating birthdays, and they were still playing games, and they were still being social, and they still had annoyances in their lives, and they still had to figure out how to go to school and set up all these structures that we take for granted. I also realized and came to learn that so many of the people in these camps, basically everyone under the age of 15 to 20 years old, had been born in this camp, and they weren't allowed to leave. They had spent their entire lives within the confines of a refugee camp. And there's a lottery system for getting placed into and resettled into other countries or getting citizenship in Thailand. And these are people who don't have any documentation. They don't have passports. They don't have the ability to move. They don't have the freedoms that we have. And after a few days of being there, this may sound obvious, but one thing that really stuck with me was, that we still have all these same shared human needs, that we still want to organize play, that we still, want to feel social connection and love and plan events and participate in music and find sources of happiness. And it was really connecting to that sort of shared humanity that really spoke to me. And it realized, again, that I had done all this research and all these other things, but this wasn't an issue of logistics. It was, the plight of a refugee is really the plight of dignity. And after a few amazing days learning and being enriched by this experience and having human-to-human connections with the family, we said goodbye to these children that I had been playing a local game with in the afternoons. And I got in the truck, and we drove toward the gate, and the children came after our truck, waving, and they got to the gate and were stopped. And finally, for the first real time, I broke down on this topic and on this issue, because it was so visible and visceral to me, the experience of what it meant to be a refugee. And I realized, again, something I had known, but it just became so visible to me, was just how random, where you end up in life really is, and where you're born and what context you're born into is just, it's a lottery. And so how should we really feel about that? And most importantly, how should we act based on what circumstances we find ourselves in? I've now had many other opportunities to travel. I've spent time in other refugee camps and in other communities, lived and worked in more than 60 countries. And a few takeaways that I just wanted to leave you with are, often the best way to understand something is to go and find humans who are actually immersed in a culture, in a place, in a knowledge set, and really make human-to-human connections. This is the game that we were playing in the afternoons with some of the students. And so, a couple of points. If you have an opportunity to go, and you might not just yet, but don't worry, they'll come to you in time. I encourage you to get out and explore your world as much as possible. And also, I encourage you, when you're seeing a news story or you hear something on the radio, your parents are listening to NPR or something, or you read the newspaper, just remember that if you hear a story, take a minute and pause and try to put yourself in the shoes of the person that they're talking about. Because often we talk about other people who are, in certain circumstances, but really just take a pause and put yourself in their shoes. Again, you just as easily could have been born into a totally different circumstance. So just remember that really can make all the difference, and to celebrate the things that you have, but know that people like you are all over the world, just like Dr. G was saying, that those students in North Korea are thinking about you as well. So thank you very much. I'll be here at lunch if anyone wants to talk shop, talk travel stories, and I'll pass it back over to Dr. G. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Porter. I appreciate you being willing to join our community today. In the time we have left, I'm going to speak about one experience I've had within the theme of what we're engaging on today about human-centered connections across these boundaries, which sometimes seem so complete and so far away, but how can we try to transcend boundaries, ideological, political, cultural, social, to recognize this shared humanity within us? So I'm going to speak briefly about Korea, and then I'd like to think about how to global, using global as a verb there, about how we on a local level, as well as an international level, can get involved in global education. As part of my doctoral program at Fordham University, I had to write a dissertation, and I wrote my dissertation on the history of U.S.-North Korean relations. And I remember being in a professor's office speaking about this, and the professor asked me, well, do you speak any Korean? And I said, about like a 3-year-old, but yes, a little bit of Korean. And he said, well, do you know any North Koreans? Have you ever actually met anyone from North Korea? Have you actually ever sat and listened to what a North Korean, what a person from the North would have to say? All these things are said with no illusions about the heinousness of the North Korean government. But have you ever actually talked to somebody who's half the history that you're going to write on? Have you thought about their humanity? As part of my doctoral program, I had the opportunity to spend time in Korea. And on one of these experiences, I found myself at the joint security area between North and South Korea. It is on the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, at a place called Panmunjom. It is sometimes referred to as the most dangerous area in the world. And it was there that I was looking at the heaviness of history, a dividing line that has separated families, loved ones, husbands and wives, parents and children for decades. A line, just a line, but one so deep with emotion. So I'm a history student. I'm looking at this line. And it was at that moment that a North Korean officer approached me, and he asked me, he said hello, and he asked me, where are you from? And I said, 안녕하십니까, 미국 사람이에요. Hi, how are you? I said it with a smile. I'm American. And he glowered at me. And he said, why are you here? And I said, 한국 사람을 사랑해요. I love the Korean people. And I said, North and South, the Korean people as a whole, I feel deeply for the Korean people. And then he looked at me, and about this moment where he's sticking his finger out at me, and he said, how can you love us so much when we hate you? And now here's a moment that was big for me, but a moment that reverberates into the future for all of us. A moment in which you become the diplomat, maybe not intentionally, but what you say has gravity. It matters. And what's most important in a moment like this? This isn't the time for a political debate. This isn't the time to butt heads, regardless of what I think about the North Korean government, and I have very strong feelings. But this was a moment in which I found myself with a human being asking, how can you love us so much when we hate you? And I responded by saying, I understand that many people, and you don't say North Korea, you'd say Chosun. I understand that many people in Chosun hate America or hate the U.S. government. Unfortunately, there are many people in the United States that not only hate the North Korean government, but might hate the North Korean people. And I think it's wrong for us to demonize our populations. Whatever we think about politics and governments, I hope that the American people will think about individuals like you and ask, does this person have a family? Does he have children? Does he want to be happy? Does he want his kids to be happy? What does it mean to have been born into North Korea and to grow up in the circumstances of this North Korean officer and then come face to face to me? What does it mean about how I respond? And so that's what I said. I hope that when you think about the United States, you'll think about human beings, people whom you should love, as we should care about you and your family. And he smiled at me. And then he pointed in the distance across the DMZ where there were American soldiers. And he said, then why do your people come to my country to make war? There's no North Koreans in the United States who are armed. In my country, in Korea, there are Americans in my country right now who are armed. And I saw a look of hatred in his eyes. What can be said in that moment? I responded by saying, I hope that when you look at that American soldier, you won't see a soldier, but you'll also see a young person who might have joined the army to go to college, who has a family. And I have no doubt that that person, he or she, would fight courageously for our country. But I hope you'll see a human being. And I hope that we, despite our differences, can agree on that your life matters, that the life of everybody in this room matters. So, how do we global? Not all of us here can go abroad. We might see these experiences and think, I don't think I'm going to be able to go to Korea in the next few years. That's okay. Your time is going to come. Maybe not next year, maybe not 2 years from now, but where in the next 5 or 10 or 15 years are you going to find yourself? You will travel responsibly. You will be thoughtful about where you go. But how will you engage with other human beings with the recognition that global education is not really about you at all and what you want to do? It's about awe and humility at the complexity of the world and about caring about what we fundamentally have in common. So engage today. Pick up a book about a culture radically different than your own. Watch documentaries. Watch movies. Listen to music that's different, that takes us out of this comfortable space where we feel like we understand what's going on. Contribute here. Enrich our community. Participate in the Multicultural Student Union. Join the Asian Culture Club and insert your idea here. How are you going to contribute? Come to me and let's have a global ed lunch session in which we talk about a global issue. And that can involve so many things that's important to you and how it will benefit all of us. Volunteer locally. Right now, Ms. Burdette, our Director of Service, is holding a tutoring program for the children of Afghan refugees who have been resettled in New Hampshire. That's happening right now. That's something you can do to contribute. And you might think it's a wonderful thing to contribute your time to tutor. It's an even more wonderful time to shake someone's hand out of respect for their human dignity and listen to what they have to say as much as you want to say something to them. Last year we had Clement Kigugu, who is a Rwandan refugee and now a Rwandan American, speak about his experiences as a refugee. We can support his organization in the future. They will have programs, cultural gatherings. And then travel. In closing, we do have travel options if it's possible, particularly summer programs. Where there be dragons, today Mr. Porter's with us. He'll be joining me at lunch to speak about these programs. They have summer programs in Nepal and Guatemala and other places around the world. They're going to get beyond tourism, that are about deep, human-centered connections, listening and learning with humility. These are for 15 and up. For our middle schoolers, I would remind you, as well as the upper school, there are also outdoor programs through a group called Derryfield Expeditions that involves outdoor experiences that can also involve engagement with indigenous communities. So whatever age you are in this room, whether travel is possible for you or if it's not, there are ways that you can get involved. In closing, though, we come back to how we started. What is the core purpose of this discussion? Why have you listened to this? I hope it is with a degree of humility and respect, but also enthusiasm, that learning about the world is fundamentally not going to be about you. It's going to be about the stories and the human dignity and the lives of others that will help us understand that everything going on, no matter how much we know, there is so much more to know about the shared human experience of those around us, near and far. Seniors.